Shri V.L. Manjul, the ex-librarian and the ex-vice chairman of the Regulating Council of the Institute, to say a few words about Shri S.K. Thakar, in whose pious memory this lecture series has been instituted. Shri Manjul.
नमस्कार. मी मराठीतनं बोलणार आहे. एरिक सँडशी सुद्धा कधी कधी मी मराठीतनं बोलतो. माझे मित्र बबनराव ठाकार यांच्या स्मृतिप्रित्यर्थ आजचं हे तिसरं व्याख्यान आपल्याकडे ठेवलेलं आहे. खूप आमची जवळजवळ 30-40 वर्षाची मैत्री, एका कुटुंबातले आम्ही होतो अशा पद्धतीनं वागत होतो. भांडारकरमध्ये ते येत होते. एक उत्तम चित्रकार होते. विशेषतः उजव्या हाताच्या या 3 बोटांनी ती चित्र काढत असत. मी त्यातले काही नमुने आपल्याला दाखवणार आहे. श्रीनिवास कृष्ण ठाकार ते स्वतःला बबन म्हणून घेत असत. त्यांचा जन्म 10 फेब्रुवारी 1927 आणि त्यांचं कैलासगमन 2/8/2003. पण आम्ही फेब्रुवारीची तारीख धरून हा कार्यक्रम करतो आहोत. हा तिसरा कार्यक्रम आहे. दादांना संत साहित्य, पंढरपूर, विठ्ठलासंबंधी ज्ञानेश्वर महाराज, तुकाराम महाराज खूप आत्मीयता, प्रेम काही करावं असं वाटत असे. मला आठवत आहे की आम्ही शिऊरला गेलो होतो त्यांच्याबरोबर आणि तिथे दादांनी खूप काम केलं. दादांनी शिऊरवरून काही हस्तलिखित आणली होती. दादा गेल्यानंतर दादाने ती हस्तलिखितं आणि त्यांचे ग्रंथ भांडारकरच्या लायब्ररीला दिले. दादांच्या मृत्यूच्या समयी दुर्दैवाने मी इथं होतो. तंजावरला काही मराठी हस्तलिखितं पाहायला दादा तंजावरला गेले होते आणि त्याला तिथे मोठा असा प्रकृतीचा त्रास झाला, थंडीचा त्रास झाला, सर्दी झाली आणि इथं आल्यानंतर त्यातनं ते उठले नाहीत. दादांना कविता करायचा नाद होता. एखाद्या माणसाबद्दल थँक्स द्यायचे असले तर कवितातून देत असत. अलंकारिक भाषा वापरून ते देत असत. दादांना मला खूप आठवतं सगळ्या गोष्टी. दादांच्यावर मी मुंबईत फिरलो आहे, दादांच्यावर पुण्यात बऱ्याच ठिकाणी फिरलो. आमच्या भांडारकरमध्ये मी आणि दुसरे डॉक्टर लद्दू हे त्यांचे खास मित्र. आले की माझ्याकडे हाजरी लावणार आणि जाताना लद्दूंच्याकडे हाजरी लावून जाणार. दादा बोटांनी चित्र काढत असत. ही 3 बोटं जी आहेत ही चित्रासाठी दादा वापरत असत आणि त्यांची चित्र ही अशी, त्यांनी मला त्याकरता पुस्तक देऊन ठेवलं होतं. हे अशा प्रकारची चित्र त्यांची असायची, बोटांनी काढलेली. आणि ती बोटांनी का काढावीत या संबंधीचं विवेचनही त्यांनी केलं होतं. हे बोट चित्राकरता वापरलं जावं असं त्यांचा आग्रह असे आणि त्या बोटांनी ते अनेक चित्र काढत असत. काही काही वेळेला माझ्याकडे येऊन बसून चित्र काढत असत, कविता करत असत. पण असा एक मित्र, एक स्कॉलर, दादांना या जमाती आहेत वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारच्या, मागास जमाती, त्यांच्याबद्दल आत्मीयता वाटे. दादा त्यांना भेटण्याकरता जात असत. आमच्या तिकडे पौड फाट्यावर एक बाजार भरत असे या लोकांचा. त्या बाजारात दादा येत असत आणि फिरून लोकांची चौकशी करत असत. शिऊरच्या तुकाराम महाराजांच्या शिष्या बहिणाबाई यांचं काहीतरी देहूमध्ये स्मारक असावं म्हणून देहूच्या तुकाराम मंदिरामध्ये दादांनी प्रयत्नपूर्वक बहिणाबाईची मूर्ती करून तिथे दिली आणि सदानंद मोऱ्यांच्या प्रयत्नामुळे ती मूर्ती तिथे आज बसलेली आहे. दादांचं मोठं काम आहे ते. आणि दादांनी जे शिऊरचे अभंग आणले बहिणाबाईचे ते भांडारकरच्या हस्तलिखित संग्रहात आहेत, माझ्याकडेही ते आहेत. खूप दादांना वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारचे छंद होते आणि आज आपल्या सुदैवाने माझेच एक मित्र जुने डॉक्टर एरिक सँड जे पंढरपुरावर आणि विठ्ठलावर प्रेम करतायत ते आज लाभलेले आहेत. मला एकच एरिक सँडची आठवण सांगायची, बाकी बहुळकर बोलणार आहेत. एरिक सँड वारीला पंढरपूरला चालले होते. शर्ट पायजमा, डोक्यावर टोपी, गळ्यात तुळशीची माळ. पुंडलिकाच्या समोर मी त्यांच्या गळ्यात माळ घातली होती आणि पायी निघाले आळंदी ते पंढरपूर. पुण्याला आल्यानंतर ते म्हणाले मला अडचण होते. म्हटलं काय होत आहे? लोक माझ्या पाया पडतात म्हणे, मला नाही आवडत ते. तर म्हटलं तुम्ही पाया पडा त्यांच्या, काय बिघडलं? अहो म्हणे त्यांचे पाय चिखलानं भरलेले असतात वगैरे, कसं काय पाया पडायचं? आणि आमच्या दोघांच्या पाय चपला नसतात. मग शेवटी मी त्यांना म्हटलं त्यांच्या गुडघ्याला हात लावून नमस्कार करा, म्हणजे चालतं म्हणलं आमच्या वारकरी संप्रदायात. असे खूप मजा एरिक सँडच्या आहेत. एरिक सँड आज बोलणार आहेत. खरं कौतुकाची गोष्ट आहे. मी इथेच थांबतो, फार वेळ घेत नाही. धन्यवाद.
May I now request Professor Bahulkar to introduce today's speaker.
Friends, it's a matter of great pleasure this evening to have our old good friend, Dr. Eric Sand, for this prestigious lecture series in the loving memory of Sri Srinivas Krishna Thakar. He is going to speak on a critical study of the Pandhari Mahatmya or Panduranga Mahatmya, which has been a favorite subject of his research for the last many years. I think Mr. Sand, he came to Pune sometime in the 80s, 1980s, or even before that, to work on Shraddha rituals, and in that connection, he visited this institute, visited various places in Pune, met some Pandits, and wrote his dissertation on that topic. During his stay in Pune, he got interested in Marathi and Marathi culture and various texts of Mahatmya texts. He also visited Pandharpur with Manjul, and he decided to work on Maharashtra culture. As we know, there are very few scholars abroad who are interested in Marathi culture, Marathi Bhasha, and Panduranga and various other topics related to that. So when we met first, he was working on a text called Bhima Mahatmya. I thought it was quite proper on his part to work on that topic, Bhima Mahatmya, because there is an inseparable relation between sand and river. So he worked on that and continued his research on Panduranga Mahatmya. He has written a number of articles, about 50 articles, book chapters and book reviews on various topics related to Vedic religion, Vedic ritual, late Vedic ritual, Bhagavad Gita, and also he has written interested research papers on contemporary India, religion and politics in India, and so on. He has written extensively in English and Danish, his mother tongue. Some of his articles are the Bhima Mahatmya, a hitherto unknown source for the study of Pandharpur, Mata Pitru Bhakti, some aspects of the development of the Pandharpur legend in Marathi literature, the legend of Pundarika, the founder of Pandharpur, rituals between religion and politics, the case of Vishwa Hindu Parishad's 2001-2002 Ayodhya campaign, and so on. He has been working in the University of Copenhagen as Associate Professor of History of Religious Studies, Religions, in Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies, University of Copenhagen. I welcome him. I also welcome our friend Professor Kenneth Zisk, Professor of Sanskrit in the same university, and Luca, his wife. I also welcome you all and request Professor Sand to begin his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Does this mic work? Can you hear what I'm saying? Acha, dhanyawad. Well, thank you, Mr. Manjul, and thank you, Professor Bahulkar, for inviting me to give this lecture about something which I worked on, as Bahulkar ji said, for many, many years, too many, some might say. Thank you also for giving me the opportunity to speak in this year, 2017, and thus contribute to the Jubilee of the Pandhari Oriental Research Institute. It is so that Dr. Pandhari was one of the first to contribute to the study of, could you say, modern study of Pandharpur. He was the one who, in his very seminary work, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and other minor sects, I think it came out in 1919, he had a quite large chapter on the Valkari Sampradaya and also on Pandharpur, in which he pointed out that the old name of Pandharpur, which was Paundarika Kshetra, was actually connected with the Rishi Pundarik. He also came up with this idea that the name Panduranga was perhaps originally a name for Shiva. I'm not sure I agree completely in this context with him, but he was right in the sense that to point out that a lot of the oldest tradition of Pandharpur was actually Shaiva. Maybe I will come into that later on. Or I can just say briefly now that behind the Pundarik, or Pundalik as you may know him, Samadhi in Pandharpur, and some of the other old Shaiva temples like the Mallikarjun temple, they are Shaiva, and they are run by the Koli community, which is an old Shaiva community. So he pointed out already something very important in the study of Pandharpur's history, that it was originally Shaiva and it was taken over by Vaishnavas. So the term Vaishnavization is very important in regard to the history of Pandharpur. Probably you all know, you all know the Varkari Sampradaya, right? You all know the Abhangas of the poet saints of Maharashtra. Otherwise, you would probably not be here. When I started out, as Professor Bahulkar said, in '82, I started going on the Vari with some good friends, and I made a lot of good friends there, I can tell you. No one knew at that time, none of the people whom I talked to, except my old friend, Mr. Manjul, knew that there actually existed a Sanskrit literature about Pandharpur. Everyone said, no. These are the Varkari Sampradaya, they are Bhaktas and they don't believe in Sanskrit traditions, they are anti-Brahminic and things like that. So I thought, okay, look, bad luck for me, because I must admit I never learned very much Marathi. But I knew some Sanskrit, and I would like to work with this tradition and its Sanskrit side. So, but then it turned out that actually there is some Sanskrit literature about Pandharpur. And at that time, Dr. Dhere, whom you might know, he had started collecting material, and he was very much interested in that. And if you go through his book, Vitthal Ek Mahasamanvai, you will see that he was very respectful towards the Sanskrit Mahatmyas. He thought that they gave us a kind of clue to the origin of the Vitthal cult in Pandharpur. I'm not sure that these texts actually answer all the questions he had about this cult, but they are the ones who I'm going to talk about very briefly today. So the Sanskrit literature about Pandharpur is in fact quite large. There's a lot of short stotras and small devotional text in Sanskrit. But what I have been focusing on is the Mahatmyas. And there are two large Mahatmya texts, both called Panduranga Mahatmya, which are important for the study of the history of Pandharpur. There are also two smaller ones. I think Dr. Dere mentions a Panduranga Mahatmya belonging to the Vishnu Purana, which he had a copy. No one else has seen it. I have a copy of a manuscript in Grantha, also of the Panduranga Mahatmya, a small one, which I must admit I haven't studied yet, because Grantha I have to pick up first. But I've studied these two other texts. So that the oldest of the Panduranga Mahatmyas is said to come from the Skanda Purana. Skanda Purana Antargatam. Actually, of course, you won't find this text if you look through the printed editions of the Skanda Purana. But it is attributed to the Skanda Purana. The other one is attributed to the Padma Purana. If I start out first saying something about this Padma Purana, Antagatam Panduranga Mahatmyam. It has in fact been, that is the latest of these texts. It has in fact been printed in an old lithographic edition, which I was happy to have a copy from Mr. Manjul. I think in 1869 or something like that, quite old one, very corrupt. And of that text, there are very few manuscripts. I had the opportunity to photograph a pretty old manuscript of that text from 1707 in Pandharpur. And I've noticed another manuscript going through manuscript catalogs, which is found in Nepal. Quite interesting. But these are the only two manuscripts I know of this text. I mean, from printed catalogs. But this text, which is the latest, it is difficult to date. I guess it is probably composed somewhere in the 16th, maybe early 17th century. But this text is containing material which is probably well known to all of you. Why? Because it was translated or edited into Marathi by Sridhar Pant. So if you go to the market, you'll probably be able to get a small booklet called Pandhari Mahatmya, containing nine chapters. And that is the condensation, you could say, of the Sanskrit text. The Sanskrit text is pretty large. It contains 32 chapters describing Pandharpur and the foundational legends about how Vitthal came to Pandharpur, and also describing rituals and a lot of the smaller, less important tirthas which are supposed to be found in Pandharpur. It is all these tirthas in this text are inscribed in a yantra, which I haven't been able to really reconstruct yet. There's a pretty difficult passage describing how you should prepare this yantra. But it seems to be something similar to a Shri yantra, containing 11 avaranas full of devis and lingas and things like that. Unfortunately, I had to stop working with this text because I couldn't identify many of these places. There's an English Marathi scholar called Dr. Rayside, who has written a small article once about this Marathi 9-chapter thing, Pandhari Mahatmya. And he came up with this idea that probably most of these lingas and devis which are put into this yantra doesn't exist. I'm sorry. I think he could be right that it is written as a kind of how do you say, replica of the Kashi Kanda. If anybody knows the Kashi Kanda, you'll know that it is a big Mahatmya Sthala Purana type text which describes Varanasi. or Kashi. And some of these composers of this text might have thought, okay, Pandharpur is a very important place. We should also have a yantra, and we also have a panchakroshi, we also have all these things. Anyway, because I couldn't identify many of these things, I finally dropped studying this text in detail. And it is also quite corrupt. The readings are corrupt. Never mind. It has some very important legends at the beginning of this text, which you probably all know. One is the legend of how Vishnu fights the demon, a demon called Dindira or Dindirava. Do you know that legend, some of you? No? Okay. But there's a legend that a demon called Dindira opposes the gods, and they try how to fight this demon. So they approach Indra, who approaches Vishnu, who says, okay, I will fight this demon, but I'll do it in the form of Mallikarjun. So he fights this demon, and finally the demons ask for a boon. This is a very normal or typical motive. He asks for a boon, and he says, the only thing I want is that I will be killed by Mallikarjun's Lohadanda, his iron staff. So he gets killed from this Lohadanda, and that makes Pandharpur having the name Lohadanda. So in this text, Pandharpur is not called Pandharpur very often, at least. It's called Lohadanda or Lohadanda Kshetra. That is one legend which is popular known. And it is connected with an area in Pandharpur called Dindiravana, to the north of Pandharpur, where there are some tamarind trees. I think I'll get back to that later on. There's also an image of Lakubai or Rukmini there, a temple of Rukmini and Lakubai. Then, of course, there's the famous legend which you probably all know about Pundarik. He is called Pundarik, or Pundarika in Sanskrit, but Pundalik. And that is the story about how Krishna was staying in Dwaraka, and he had some love affair with Radha, right? Not good. He had a love affair, and Rukmini, his first wife, proper wife, got angry with him, and she fled away, saying, "Oh, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Bye-bye." And she went all the way down to Pandharpur. And she stood at this place I was talking about, where there now is this temple, the Rukmini Rakumai Lakubai temple. And then after some time, after Krishna had finished his love affair with Radha, he suddenly said, "Oh, where's my wife?" And he started looking, naturally. So he went down there to Pandharpur, and he first, then finally he found his wife there. After that, he went to the Pundalik Samadhi, or near the Pundalika, and then he gave his vows to Pundarika. There's also a third story about how Indra was turned into a reed or a stone, and that came to be the stone which is found under the image of Panduranga or Vittal. These are the main stories which you can all read very easily from this Pandhari Mahatmya. Then question comes, what about the earlier Skanda Purana? That text, the Skanda Purana, Panduranga Mahatmya, that text has not been published yet. And it has been my fate to work with a critical edition of that text for more than half my life, on and off, luckily, not all the time. But I collected about 24 manuscripts from all around India, more or less, of that text. And I have almost finished an edition by now. And my friend, Professor Kenneth Zisk from Copenhagen, he always says, oh, you finish it now. And so I'm sure my friend Mr. Manjul says, but he's too polite to say it. Isn't it? Too polite. But that's what he thinks. So if you compare these two Sanskrit texts, you see, I told you that the Padma Purana text is only found in 2 manuscripts. Of course, there may be more, but it is not spread out very much. Whereas the other text, my text I call it, is found in Tanjavur, it is found in Mumbai, 3 manuscripts are found in Mysore, 3 ones in Kolkata, 2 in Jammu, and 2 in Baroda, and 3-4 manuscripts in Varanasi. What does that tell you? What does that mean? According to my mind, it means that this text is both older, has spread more, but was also more authentic and more popular, no? And still, unfortunately, not published. So, what can we, if we look at that text, I'm going to talk a little about that text now. If we look at that text, it contains 12 chapters. It is clear to my mind that it is not composed by one author at the same time. It is actually it at least consists of 2 stratas. There are the first 4 chapters. They are separate. They are one separate Mahatmya, which is very clear from the colophons. And then the other 8 or later 8 chapters might be one full text, which more or less reiterates the 4 first chapters. In the first part, the speakers are the rishis. The rishis, they approach Skanda. That's why it is said to be part of the Skanda Purana. They approach Skanda and they ask him a special question. They say, look, Skanda, can you tell me where is the place where you find the most excellent kshetra, sacred place, the most excellent tirtha, how do you translate it? Not sacred town, but sacred place. Kshetra would be sacred town, and the most excellent devata. And Skanda doesn't know the answer. So he says, okay, let us go to my father on the Kailas mountain. He will know. So they all go to the Kailas mountain, and Shiva tells the first four acharyas about this place. Then the later part of the text has different interlocutors. Right? Suddenly, we hear that Narada, you know, the Rishi Narada, he is having this ability to go to and fro the earth and heaven. He sees, one day he sees these rishis coming from Shiva with Kanda, and he said, oh, what did they speak about? What was that? I want to know. So he goes, approaches Shiva, and then Shiva repeats the whole thing. I mean, if you look at this in a literary way, it is clearly that they want to reiterate, to repeat, to elaborate on the first 4 chapters. That is the thing. So the text consists of these 2 stratas. What is the age of this text? Of course, we cannot say precisely, but I agree with Dr. Dhere that at least the first 4 chapters, they are pre-Hemadri. That means they are before Hemadri Pandit. That means they would be before 1270s Lakubai. Why? At least we know that these 4 chapters are quoted very extensively in a text called Tirthasara by a person called Dalapati Raja, who wrote this big work on Tirthas in 1490. So it's before 1490. But then Professor Dhere has come across a text called Vitala Bhushana, which is a late text from late 18th century, in which I've forgotten his name. Do you remember the name? Gopalacharya. His name is Gopalacharya. He writes here, he quotes part of the first chapter, and he attributes it to Tirtha Hemadrao. Tirtha Hemadrao, to the Tirtha Kanda of Hemadri's Chaturvarga Chintamani. Problem is that we don't have any manuscripts left of the Tirtha Kanda of Chaturvarga Chintamani. But I think Dhere convincingly argues that it has actually been found. In that case, the first 4 chapters would be before 1270. And the later texts, the later part, or the full text as it is at present, that is probably before 1550. Why? Because it is dealt with by a Telugu poet called Tenali Ramakrishna, who wrote in Telugu a famous poem called Panduranga Mahatmya. Unfortunately, I don't read Telugu, but I've seen a Hindi translation, and it is quite evident that he knew all the 12 chapters of this text. So he was active writing in the middle of the 16th century, so the full text would be before that. So that is something about the data and the date of the text. So when you study this text, what can you learn from it? You have to, then you have to remember these things I told you before about what the legends which tells about Pandharpur, which has come down through Shrida's Pandhari Mahatmya. And then it is very interesting that in this text is much, much, much simpler. It is clear. It starts out with the legend about Pundarika. So it makes Pundarika the founder of this Kshetra, and the legend is very simple. It just tells how there was a pond. Not even the Bhima River was there at that time, of course. There was a pond, a Pushkarini, and at this Pushkarini there was this rishi who worshipped his parents. And due to that very simple fact, you could say, even though it's a different form of bhakti, Krishna came from the Govardhana mountain, the text says. He came as Krishna Gopal with the cowherds and the gopis and his cattle. He came down to Pandharpur to offer Pundarika a boon. And what did Pundarika ask for? He asked for a simple boon. He said, I want only that you should stay in this same form. And there should be a tirtha by my name and a kshetra by my name. So you recognize these three things, with which the text started out. Where is the, in one place, at the best tirtha, the best kshetra, and the best devata. Okay, he says. And he stood there, and now he's still standing there. Of course, but I'm not able to go into details like that now, but of course there's a description in that chapter of Panduranga, how he looked like and things. And that could lead you on to comparisons with the present image. But I'm not going to do that now. But I will tell you one thing which I found interesting, and that is that this first chapter dealing with the foundation of Pandharpur by Pundarika is not referring to the now great temple in Pandharpur. Clearly not. It's a legend which is connected with the tirtha, meaning the bathing place. You know, in Pandharpur, the Pundalik Samadhi is in the riverbed, no? If you have been to Pandharpur, you will know that. During the monsoon, it is flooded. So there must have been in Pandharpur at that time an image of Panduranga in the riverbed. So this myth concludes by saying that, okay, he stood, or I will be standing in the middle of the tirtha madhye. And if some people will say, no, you could take tirtha also as going with the large temple up in Pandharpur town. I say, no, not, because it clearly says that he was facing west. And that is not the case with the image in the great temple. It is facing east. So that was a little bit of a revelation to me, that this text actually not deals with the large temple and the image up there. But that doesn't mean that the large temple was not in existence at that time. We don't know exactly how old is the large temple, but there's an inscription which probably deals with the foundation from 1189. So it seems as if the Yadavas of Devgiri was involved in establishing some kind of Sanskritic Vaishnava cult in an area which was earlier, or at that time was Kannada influenced area. But the text has both images, but not in connection with Pundarika, which is quite logical because now Pundarika is in the riverbed. Then several things, other things are different in this text. It is logical that if we talk about the name of Pandharpur, it is here called Paundarika. As I mentioned, that Professor Bandaka already dealt with that name. Paundarika is a derivation of Pundarika. So the Tirtha was called after Pundarika, and the Kshetra was also called after Pundarika. And the text is quite, fixed in that. Not completely, because it also uses the name Panduranga for the Kshetra, but mainly it uses Panduranga for the god name of Vittal, for the name of the god. Otherwise, it uses the name Hari. So what we have here is the Gopala, Krishna coming down from the Govardhana mountain. So it's a way of legitimizing Pandharpur and making Pandharpur a place, a Vaishnava place connected with Krishna. And it uses Hari. But it doesn't say Vishnu. The first part of the text doesn't mention Vishnu at all. Another thing is, which differs, there's no mention of Rukmini or Rukmini image or Rukmini temple at all in this text. Not at all. I should take care that I don't get into too many details, I think. Otherwise, what does it deal with? Overall, you could say, and that is, I think, an interesting observation, that this very early, that is the earliest written document we have apart from the Abhankas of the various Varkaris. That the places mentioned in this text are very similar to the places known from the Varkari tradition. What places are mentioned? It mentions the two images of Panduranga. It mentions a place nearby the great temple called Nirasingha. It mentions a place called Padmatirtha, which is probably identical with the present Padmavati to the west. And then it has the idea of 4 inner gates, Antadvaras, and 4 goddesses standing at each of these 4 gates. So it produces some kind of simple mandala, you could say, or simple yantra of Pandharpur. These devis are to the east Savitri, to the south, to the south it's not a Devi, sorry. It is Siddheshwara, and to the east it is Bhuvaneshwari, and to the north it is Durga. So again you see that these Devis are taken over and Vaishnavized in a way, made as to be part of a Vaishnava tradition. So not all these places are known to the Varkaris today, but they are known in simple guidebooks which you may buy in Pandharpur. If we go to the later part of this text, it simply elaborates upon these. It has a new legend about how Pandhari came to Pandharpur, which is reduplicated because first, first Brahma comes and says hello. And then Pundarika says to Brahma, I would like that Vishnu would come or Krishna would come. Okay, then later on, Krishna comes, and the same things are reiterated, the same boons he is getting. And then the second part elaborates on the various tirthas found in and around Pandharpur, giving myths, more detailed myths about persons who had sinned and who came to the Padma Tirtha and just drank a little bit of the water, or they came to Vishnupada, drank a little bit of the water, and then they were saved and they went straight into heaven. It's moral legends about the efficiency of the various sub-tirthas in this place. Another thing is that the second part of the text is more Sanskritic in a way, it's more detailed. It is talking not about Hari, as in the first place, or Gopala, but it is talking about Vishnu. All the way through Vishnu, or mentioning the name of Vishnu, or Mahavishnu, or Madhava, meaning that it seems to be written by people who are more into a Vaishnava theological tradition than the first 4 chapters were. Then it also it repeats the description of the 4 gates, which are kind of the Naga Pradakshina, and develops it talking about 4 outer gates also, 4 outer gates, which is Kolhapur, Karavirapur, and it is a place called Shurpalai, and it is Trivikrama, and then it is Nirsingha Kshetra just to the north of Pandharpur. So it is having an outer pradakshina also. Do you know Gopalpur? No? Gopalpur? To the south of Pandharpur, there's a small hamlet in which there are temples of Krishna and Yashoda and other deities. Gopalpur is not mentioned at all in my text. It is mentioned only in the later Padma Purana text. So these are the things, I think my time is running out, but these are the things which we can learn from a study of this text, which I hope to publish soon then. And it shows not anything about what is the origin of Vittala. We cannot say. We can only say it shows that right from the beginning of our sources, Vittala was identified with Krishna, and later on how it develops to become identified with Vishnu. And then finally, I would say, of course, if you compare these 2 texts, you could come up, or you cannot help speculating why did these new legends develop in the Padma Purana text, I think. And that, my theory is that these things are of course connected with the religious activities in Pandharpur. And you can see how the Bhadava Brahmins started a new temple in the area called Dindideva Vana. And in the Padma Purana, it actually talks about not two Pandurangas, but 3. There's a Trikona. And of course, the Bhadava Brahmins you have used probably this text to legitimize this new concept of the Tirtha. And they also wanted to introduce the Dindiravana and things like that. Why? Apart from economical, religious considerations, I don't know. But you could talk a lot about that, but I think my time is out. Bahul Kaji. So I thank you for listening. And I don't know whether there's time for questions. There are time for questions. If anybody has a question, I'll be happy to try to answer.
Any questions?
Yes? How I got interested in studying Panduranga? Simply by taking part in this Vadi. That was it. Then I was probably sold to Vittala. Yes?
Sorry, yeah, please. Is there any overlap in the information that you get in Bhima Mahatmya and in Pandhari Mahatmya? In Bhima Mahatmya and Pandhari Mahatmya? Overlap in the information?
I mean, the Bhima Mahatmya is a much simpler, shorter. It's only one chapter. And there you also find the name Pandharika, but only connected with the place in the Tirtha, which probably is identical with the present Pundalik Samadhi. That is, by the way, also the case in the Padma Purana. And then, if you look at the names in the Bhima Mahatmya, it simply uses Pandhari, which is the normal Marathi name for Pandharpur. Otherwise, no big differences. It has an interesting etymology of Panduranga, saying that it is the place, or Pandhari, that it is the place where Krishna became white.
Yeah.
You can think about that. What I feel? Happiness. Huh? Sundar te Jahan. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Pune is rightly called the cultural capital of Maharashtra. On the similar lines, it won't be an exaggeration if Pandharpur is called the spiritual or religious capital of Maharashtra. Exactly 1 year ago, Shri Manjul delivered the second Thakar Memorial Lecture on Pandharpurcha Alakshit Katha. And today we are fortunate to listen to the enchanting talk by Professor Eric Sand about Pandhari Mahatmya. Thank you, sir. I extend my heartfelt gratitude towards him. Thanks a lot. I also express my thankfulness to the family of Shri S.K. Thakar for establishing the lecture series, and we are also delighted by their presence on this occasion. Thanks are also due to Dr. Vijay Bedekar and his team in Thane for the live webinar arrangements. I thank the print media for the timely publicity of the event. I conclude by thanking and expressing my gratitude to this august gathering. Thank you all.